I grew up under very non-ideal conditions. I was in an apocalyptic sect, so they believed the world was about to end. So it's a very unsettling way of life. I've been to Australia, I've been to New Zealand and Singapore. I've been extremely lucky.
Yeah.
A lot of my job kind of involves going around the world and staying with my friends and shooting things we both like together. I married one of my photographers.
Cool.
But in the early days, I think especially because I'd been so poor and I was suddenly being paid decently, I just felt like they're paying me all this money. I should do whatever they say.
Influencer Insight shares the battles, stories, successes of models, influencers, and entrepreneurs as they find the balance of being influential leaders today while creating long-lasting impact for the future. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another session of Influencer Insights, where I have Ariel Anderssen from the UK joining me today. She's been a model for 20 years or so, someplace in there, and she's here to share some of her stories, some of her experience. She's got some things that people might be surprised about her, but she does some really cool work, and we're really glad to have Ariel on. So welcome, Ariel.
Thank you very much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Absolutely. No, it's so good we could connect and make this happen. So if anybody's interested right off the hop, Ariel's got a great YouTube channel, so go and check that out right away. She's looking for subscribers. She's got some good stories she shares there. So we were just joking about that beforehand. But Ariel, tell us a little bit about yourself and where you're from and how you got into modeling and that kind of thing.
Oh, I'm a UK-based freelance model. So I live in Wales now, but I'm actually from England. I've been modeling for 20 years. I've worked in fashion, in glamour, a lot of artistic nude, because I trained originally as a ballet dancer, so that's useful currency in the kind of art nude world.
Yeah.
And I also have worked in fetish photography for my whole career as well. And these days I'm also a BDSM video performer. So a lot of my work is currently improvised video, which is something I love because after I trained as a ballet dancer, I trained as a classical actress. So acting on camera is something I really love. Other than that, yes, I have a channel which I started in order to give advice to new models. I diverge a bit from that theme sometimes, but basically I tend to come back to that core subject because I'm aware that it's such an unregulated industry. It can be quite difficult when you get started. And because if you're going to have bad experiences, they're so often going to be at the beginning of your career.
Right.
I wanted something to counteract that. I'm also an author. My memoir, Playing to Lose, came out last year, and I'm right in the middle of writing my second book, which is the story of a year in the life of a freelance model. So I'm 2/3 of the way through writing that at the moment. So that is me.
A lot of little insights that I think a lot of people that are getting into the industry are going to really find valuable. So if you don't mind me taking you back, what was your growing up experience? What got you into doing ballet and that sort of thing?
I always wanted to do ballet. From the first time I saw a ballet dancer, I knew I had to learn how to do it. I just found it so beautiful. So I trained as a ballet dancer all the way through my childhood until I reached the age of 18, by which point I was 6'2". So I was like a foot too tall to be a ballet dancer, basically. But by then it was too late. I loved it. I injured my back, so I couldn't continue dancing after that. So I trained as an actress instead, basically because I couldn't do the thing I really wanted to do. And then when I discovered modeling, I found that okay, it's not dancing, but it's still using your body in a similar way. And I became addicted to it because it was like having a second chance at dancing, just in a slightly less rigorous way. So it's been a bit less cruel to my body than dancing was.
It's really great that you've been able to kind of pursue the arts and do that work right through, though, right? Because some people, it's kind of this background dream that they want, where you kind of just push through and made it happen, right? So
yeah, I'm really lucky, because when I injured my back and I couldn't dance anymore, I thought that was sort of 10 years of training just completely wasted.
Models, join us on Facebook in our group where we've got all kinds of support and training you need to become a better model today. Check the link in the description.
And to discover, no, it wasn't wasted. There are numerous ways that you can use that kind of training in later life. And I couldn't have been a ballet dancer even if I hadn't got injured. But actually that training was the beginning of what's allowed me to be a successful model. And I'm really glad that I did it.
The back injury, was that a dancing accident or was it?
No, it wasn't an accident. It was an overuse injury. I was training in ballet and I was training in gymnastics and trampolining at the same time. And I pushed myself too far and it started to hurt. And I thought I'll work through the pain because that's what you're kind of taught to do.
Yeah.
And by the time I realized it was too late, I'd injured myself too far to be able to fully recover from it.
Yeah.
So in my early years as a model, it used to hurt a lot as well because it was an injury. But as time's gone on, I think I've become a bit more conservative with the poses I do.
There you go.
Maybe now I'm 47 instead of 25. People don't expect me to like bend over backwards into a circle.
Right.
So it's much kinder to my body these days, I think.
Or you can tell them to go away if they ask to right now. So yeah.
Book someone young.
yeah, exactly. Try somebody else. Yeah.
Yes.
No, that's very cool. What kind of connected you to the modeling side of things? Where did that moment came from?
I didn't plan to be a model at all. I think probably like a lot of people, I didn't think I'd be able to be a model. I think that we see such perfect images in media.
Yes.
I can't imagine many people grow up thinking, you know what, I think I look good enough to be a model. So it never occurred to me. I thought it looked like a lovely job, but I didn't expect to ever do it. So I didn't pursue it, but I moved to London as an actress and photographers kept approaching me on the street and asking if I'd do photo shoots. And I just assumed they were murderers.
Right, yeah, of course, yeah.
Because I just moved to a big city, it all seemed quite suspect. But I was a very poor, struggling young actor, and I couldn't afford to keep getting my headshots redone, which is what you're meant to do every few months. And so because I'd been approached by a number of photographers, I thought, well, maybe I could find one. And if I approach him rather than him approaching me, maybe he won't be a murderer. I wrote to one, and the first one I wrote to said yes, he'd do my headshots if I would pose for him for some of his kind of experimental photography. And I thought, absolutely, that's an amazing deal for me. Yep. And I was just really lucky. He was an excellent photographer. He was a professional. And it was 2003. And he said, well, there's this new website called One Model Place, which at the time was like the big networking site for models and photographers. So he said, put a profile up there. He told me how much to charge hourly. And I just put his pictures on this website and I started getting offered work. And it was so easy compared to acting because as
exactly.
Oh my God.
You don't have to talk. You just have to hold one facial position.
That's amazing. And the crucial thing was I didn't have to go to castings because it was online, go to auditions like I was as an actor. I was just being offered work from my computer. And that was such a revolution in the industry. And I was lucky enough to start just when that was taken off. And it was amazing. I used to do office work in between acting jobs and I started modeling and I never went back to an office. And it's 20 later now. And it was like a miracle because it was just, I'd been poor and I hadn't had enough work. And then it was like walking through a door and I wasn't poor and I had enough work. And it was
too much
just amazing. It was amazing.
It's pretty cool. I don't know if I actually realized that. Like, I'm going to sound young or old someplace in between, but the internet in 2003, I don't know if I realized there was a networking site like that already. So that's pretty cool that you got to...
Well, yeah, because it was already quite big. So I'd had no idea. But by the time I discovered it, I was member 60,000 and something. So, there were plenty of people already. It was... yeah. And I'd had absolutely no idea it existed. And at the time, modelling agents were often still a bit shocked as well. That then I started to get modelling agents. And then I'd explain, well, I've got freelance work as well. And they were like, what's that? How have you got that? And so, it was a time of very fast change. And it was a really exciting time to be a model because of this very, very fast change. And the fact that for the first time, you didn't necessarily need an agent or a manager or anyone.
Right.
If you had a computer, you could do it yourself.
Right. Yeah. Just a total shift in thinking. So,
yeah.
How did that translate? Did you start traveling with that right away when you started booking those shows? Or?
Yeah, I did. I think on my first week as a model, my first shoot was in London, where I lived. My second shoot was the north coast of Scotland, and I had to fly there. And I felt so important.
What?
I felt so important. It was a real budget airline. I think it had cost like $80 for the flight. And I just felt like the most glamorous person in the world. Like one super cheap airport on a really cheap plane to another really cheap airport. 2 days working outdoors naked in the north of Scotland in wintertime, which was terribly cold. But oh my God, yes, it felt like completely living the dream.
What kind of shoot was that first one that you got to fly for?
It was with an amazing. Oh, do you mean the one in London or the one in Scotland?
Do both.
First.
Tell me both.
Okay, yeah, sure. The one in London was with a Spanish photographer who'd come over to shoot with British models for a week, and he took me to a studio. I subsequently worked out loads, and I'd never really been in a photo studio before, and they had one studio that was completely white and one studio that was completely black and another studio that just had a big double bed in it that I just thought looked really suspect. I never got booked in that one.
Yeah, I'm good, yeah.
Just working in a big white room, I just thought it was amazing. And then in Scotland, I was doing outdoor art nude, and I shouldn't have taken the booking really because it was December, but I just thought, well, this is a professional photographer. Obviously, he wouldn't book me for this if it wasn't going to be warm enough. Now I realise that is a lie. Like, they will.
That's what you told yourself, right?
Yeah. So I've never been so cold in my life, but he was a very talented photographer, and the pictures were beautiful. And it led on to be doing a lot more work like that in warmer places, which I appreciate.
Yes, better to get. If you're going to do that, you may as well kind of enjoy the experience a little bit anyway, right? So
absolutely, yeah. I got very keen on working in the desert when I'd done a few shoots in Scotland in winter. I realised what I really like is California. Nice. That's where I want. Yeah. Yes.
So something like is California, is that as far as you've been, or have you been to other?
No, I've been incredibly lucky. I've been to Africa.
Wow.
I've been to Australia. I've been to New Zealand and Singapore, and the Cook Islands. So no, I've been extremely lucky because as a child, I actually grew up in a religious cult, and we didn't go on foreign holidays. And I used to live quite near an airport, and I'd see planes overhead, and I used to imagine what it would be like to be on them going far away. And then I got to do it, and I didn't have to pay to do it, which just again,
whole different ball.
Seems like what an extraordinary privilege. And I guess I was lucky to be doing this at a time when flights were cheap. Like, they've got a lot more expensive since. So I'm not sure if photographers now would be booking models to fly all over the world quite so much as they did back then. But back then, I used to be able to fly to the USA from the UK for like about $300. So it really was very cheap compared to now. Yeah. So no, in the first couple of years, when I was still cheap to hire, I went everywhere. And then I became a bit more expensive to hire, and people stopped flying me around so much. But yeah, the first few years was very, very exciting. I was just like a tourist for. That's very cool. 4 years. It was lovely.
It'd be kind of a weird, surreal feeling. You'd be just, I made it. Right.
And like, having not traveled at all, it was. Yeah, it was pretty magical. I'm always very keen on people becoming models, and I know it's not the right job for everyone, but I feel quite evangelical about it because it's been so good to me that I feel like, there's a really good chance if you've got an aptitude for it, you're going to have, an amazing few years of your life, even if you don't want to stick with it for as long as I have. But my experience is the rewards are greater the longer you stick with it, because you're safer, you have more contacts. It just becomes a much more stable career as time goes on.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm become a professional model.
If you don't mind me asking about the rate thing, your initial mentor photographer there kind of gave you some tips on where to start that. How can you start just charging more at some point and being like, I can't get rid of people?
Yeah. So when I started off, my day rate and my hour rate was pretty decent. Like, I still see lots of models charging about that. But what I used to do is I used to offer insane discounts for week-long bookings. That's why people were taking me to all these lovely places, because I was kind of charging what I should have charged for 2 days. I was kind of charging for a week. So, it did get me to some lovely places. But after a while, I realized this is just killing my back. I've still got an injury. It would be better if I was working a bit less for a bit more money. And if I wasn't going and staying with a photographer in Spain and shooting at dawn and dusk, like for 7 days in a row. So I think I learned to conserve my energy a bit better. But at first, it's so exciting. And it was, even though it was low pay for a model, probably, it was high pay compared to being an actress, an actress at the beginning of her career. So it took me a while to realize, I was probably pitching myself a bit.
That's a good realization. A lot of people would burn themselves out, and they wouldn't even think about that as being an option, right? Because they just pack her in. So
yeah, and honestly, I think if I hadn't been so kind of injury prone, I might not kind of served my resources so much. But I'd already had one career wrecked by injury, and so I knew my vulnerability. So I think in a way that kind of helped
prepared
me.
You. Yeah,
a little bit. Obviously, it's fun, but it is an important life lesson. So at least I learned it.
Sure. Well, that's good, and inspiring to other people to help them realize that there's a lot of potential out there too if they just put the work in, and even if things don't go the way you hope that they did, they can turn around too, right? So
yeah, exactly. I think there are often ways to use the training that you've done, even though you might not do the obvious job that it leads into. Especially these days, there are so many opportunities.
It's crazy.
Itself that I think you can always find something that allows you to at least exercise some of those skills that you
What about I don't know, we talked about some highlights there. Is there any specific shoot or gig that you did that you were like kind of blown away in the last few years kind of thing? Or
I mean, this sounds really boring of me, but in the last few years, a lot of what I do is I work with people I already know and I already like, and I do the stuff that I already like doing. So although that is lovely, it means that, in the last kind of 10 years, there haven't been many sort of surprise, oh my God, I've never done this before.
Right.
Because I'm doing the stuff I like. But the thing I really love about this job is, especially because I've done it for a long time, a lot of my best friends are in this industry now. So a lot of my job kind of involves going around the world and staying with my friends and shooting things we both like together. I married one of my photographers. I mean, it's kind of my world now. And I think, honestly, that's the highlight of it. The fact that I basically get to work with my friends most of the time. And I mean, that, again, I keep using the word privilege, but it does feel like an immense privilege, because I've found the people in our industry, broadly speaking, to be this really nice, liberal bunch of people who, like, although there is some decent money in this field, I don't think there's enough money in it to make people really mean and corrupt. So I a lot of the people are kind of in it, at least to some degree, because they just love it, and that makes for a really nice community. So honestly, I think that's kind of my highlight, just the people, like that's the night. Cool. That's
kind of the dream. A lot of people go into a career and they think they want to do something specific, whether they go to school for it or whatever it is. And they get there and they're like, man, I don't really like doing this. And at the end of the day, it's often just you don't like working with the people you're with, right? So if you can find people you work with, it's amazing how poor the work can sometimes be, and you enjoy it so much. But to enjoy something and do it with people you love, I mean, that's awesome. So
I think if you find that, it just feels like worth hanging on to with everything you can, because you're really very lucky if you find both of those things in one.
Totally. How did you meet your spouse then?
So I was quite a new model still.
Okay.
A new model friend of mine, because everyone was new, she told me, there's this really great bondage photographer who lives quite near you. And I remember her saying, it's bondage, but it's really nice. And I'd always thought I'd try bondage. So I found a website, and it was a pay site, like an online magazine that he runs himself. And it was beautiful. Yeah. So I thought, yes, I'm definitely going to do that. So I wrote to him and said, like, would you like to hire me? And he wrote back and said, no, thank you. And at that point, because I was so new, I don't think anyone had actually said no to me yet.
Right.
I kind of this new feel where everyone was really welcoming.
Rejection.
I thought, how rude. Right, I'm going to make him work with me, and I'm going to show him I'm the best model there ever was. So I wrote back and said, well, how about if I did a deal with you financially? So I'll cut my rate in half. Because at that point I was still new, my day rate far more than I'd ever made before anyway. So even my half day rate was still a lot to my mind. So he said, okay, all right, I'll work with you. And then I went to the shoot, prepared to do my best modeling ever. And we became friends, and we worked together for many years. And eventually I broke up with my partner. He was in the middle of a breakup with his partner. So we were luckily sort of single at the same time, and we started dating. And now we've been married 12 years. He still runs his bondage website. I still model for him. And we've been running our businesses kind of concurrently for all of that time.
Complementary almost of it, right? So
it's really nice, because I think dating and marrying within this industry, it means that I think you understand each other's work, and I think that jealousy is much less of a issue than it might be if one of you was traveling around the world,
Right.
working one-to-one with the opposite sex. I can see how some people might struggle with that, but because we both do it, I'll leave for a tour, half an hour later some model will turn up to stay at the house and work for my husband, and
Right.
the balance, I think, makes it a lot more comfortable than it might be otherwise.
Yes, you just understand it's part of the work you do versus relationally
Totally.
issue or anything. So
Absolutely.
cool. Well, that's good. Yeah, I could see that being a challenge for a lot of people for sure. So that's good you guys can find that. Then.
Yeah, and I know people can be horrible. Like I know my lovely model girlfriends have been modeling for years, and then they'll get a new boyfriend, and he'll ruin it for them by making them feel guilty. And they sometimes give up, or they change the sort of work that they do. Then the relationship breaks up, and they come back into it. And although I think often, unfortunately, models choose really awful partners, especially when we're young, yes. I also see why some partners might struggle with it a bit, because it's a very unusual career.
Yes.
It puts you in the way of a very different way of life, and the people booking you find you physically attractive. That's why they're booking you. That might not mean they're going to do anything inappropriate, but there is that dynamic which does complicate things a little bit. Yes. Yeah, finding a partner who's positive about your work, I think, is really precious.
Sure. No, that's cool. That's a textbook love story. That feels like it should be a movie or something like that.
Yeah.
Maybe one day, right? So.
Yeah, especially the bit where he said no.
Yeah. That's hilarious. Hey, sometimes it's that what's the word? Dedication and persistence to get there too, right? So.
Totally. So now if I meet models my husband has turned down, I often tell them, like, don't worry, he turned me down.
Try again and it'll come back around again. Right?
Yeah, he might marry you.
That's funny. Shifting gears a little bit, the mental health thing is a big piece in the industry, and I'm so glad to hear such a positive spin from it from your angle, because it doesn't always go that way for people. But what are some things you learned maybe early on that you wish you would have known sooner, or somebody would have told you when you got started?
Oh, as a model, the thing I wish I could go back and tell 25-year-old me not to worry about offending people by saying no to things.
No.
And I know I meet so many newer models, and so many of them have such horrible experiences early on, and then later on, when you've got confidence to say no to stuff. And I can't remember the last time I had a bad experience at a shoot. It's a long time ago. But in the early days, I think, especially because I'd been so poor and I was suddenly being paid decently, I just felt like they're paying me all this money, I should do whatever they say. Right. And that's a really dangerous situation to put yourself into, because you can be pressurized to do stuff in terms of nudity or sexuality that's beyond what you're comfortable with, but also you have to be persuaded into doing things that are downright dangerous. And I experienced both of those things. And so now when I meet new models, I just want to say it's better to be rude than to be, dead.
Right. Yeah.
But it probably took me 10 years to really understand that. Wow. And that's a really long time to have been putting myself at risk. So that's what I always just want new models to know, that no picture is worth risking yourself physically. No. The photographer can always try it a different way, or with someone who's qualified to do that thing, if it's rock climbing or something. So if a photographer asked me to do something dangerous, I might say, show me what you mean, and then we'll see if you can do it. Right. But I was very slow to learn that lesson, and I want other people to learn that much faster.
Yeah, for sure. What was there a catalyst or something that you finally said enough? Or
yeah, actually, I had a shoot that was just so insane. I almost hesitate to mention it because it was so stupid of me and so dangerous. But it was a bondage shoot. It was like an artistic bondage shoot, so I was going to be tied up with ropes and then suspended. Oh my. So quite high in the air. Now, I've done this before and I've done it since. And it can create such beautiful images. It's like a sort of mixture of bondage and circus sort of performance. Okay. It's beautiful. But there is a procedure for doing it safely, and they didn't follow that procedure. And I knew what the procedure was, which is basically using a belay device, so that when you pull the model up in the air, like you're pulling a rope over a beam, but you have something, the person pulling the rope has a device so that if they let go of the rope by mistake, you won't land on your head. And they didn't have, and I could see they didn't. And I just felt like, but it'll be so rude if I say,
Right.
Oh, where's your belay device? Eventually I did say, like, do you have anything to stop me just falling on my head if you let go of the rope?
Yeah.
And he said, oh no. And I should have just said, okay, the shoot's over. And I didn't, because I was so socialized into being polite.
Okay.
Oh my God, you're funny. And I had, I mean, it was fairly short-lived, but I had a sort of trauma reaction afterwards. I remember I couldn't sleep because I just keep thinking about what could have happened. And I remember just praying while I was in the air, praying that if they dropped me, I would die fast. That's the only thing I could. I mean, and that's
what the position you're in to be saying that, right?
ridiculous situation to be in for $300 or something. I'm just ridiculous. Right. And that's when I thought I must never put myself in this position again, because not only have I risked myself, right, but by this point in my career, I'm a name in this field, and other models will see that I've done it and they'll think it was safe, and they'll go to the photographer. And I started to really realize then my responsibility to the people who come after me as well. But sure. I mean, I wish I'd thought of that a bit sooner, to be honest.
Yeah, live and learn though, right? So what are some tools or some things that you do to combat, because I mean, it's easy to say I'm not going to allow people to do that, but there's often expectations that are in place, or maybe expectations that weren't in place ahead of time. Is there some things that you use, tools or strategies to try and make sure that you mitigate those dangerous situations? Or
I've basically got one technique.
Okay.
It's not very sophisticated, but I say, do you have insurance for this? And the answer is always no. And so, I remember someone trying to get me to pose with a tiger, and I mean that sounded such a cool shoot. Really. So then I went to look up like who's done shoots with tigers. All I found was a whole load of stories of people being attacked by tigers. So, yeah. So I wrote to the photographer and said, I would love to. Can you get insurance for that? And he went away and spoke to his insurance broker, and the insurance broker said, no, it's really dangerous. And he realized it wasn't a very good idea. So ever since then, that's just what I do. And the answer is always, no, I don't have insurance. And then I can, it gives me like a more comfortable way of saying, oh, well, I'm so sorry, I can't do it then. Yeah. That's not a very good technique. That is all I've got. But I'm
good one, though.
assertiveness has come to me very late in life. I'm still working on that, and it's quite difficult. So I really hope a lot of one thing that makes me really happy is when I meet the youngest models, kind of the 20-year-olds now.
Yeah.
They've grown up post MeToo, and more awareness of consent being really important, and they do seem a bit more fierce than my generation of models, and it makes me really happy to see that even quite new models do seem on balance much better than my generation at just saying no, I don't want to do that, which is amazing. It makes me really happy to see that.
Did the Me Too movement, did you see a lot of change in the industry coming from where you were and seeing it after overall? Or is it...
I've certainly seen a difference in the newer models. Absolutely. They just seem a lot more aware, a lot more kind of awake to risks and what they should expect from photographers. But actually, I think a lot of the change I've seen has actually been a result of COVID. And obviously, Me Too happened only a little bit before COVID, really.
Right.
But because during COVID, so many of us had to start working from home, shooting our own content, so many of us started doing Patreon or OnlyFans or something like that, that by the time COVID was over, a lot of us, me included, actually didn't need to work with anyone else if we didn't want to. So I have gone back to work with other photographers, but I only work with the ones who make me feel 100% comfortable. So I think a lot of the people in my industry over here who were known to be predatory, they didn't seem to struggle to get models pre-pandemic, but post-pandemic, I mean, some of them are just out of business now, and that makes me really happy to see, because I know I used to go back to photographers who made me feel a bit uncomfortable. I'd never have gone back to someone who, assaulted me, but if someone just made me feel a bit uncomfortable, I would have kind of gone back, and now that's just gone. I mean, so many of my model friends are they don't have to go to work, so they will, but they'll only work with people they actively like, who make them feel actively safe and comfortable, and that's a massive change. That's amazing. I love it.
But it probably builds a little accountability for some of the creepy people too, right? Like that they know people aren't going to stand for stuff, or they're going to be called out pretty fast if they're doing something, right? So I
think the kind of twin prongs of Me Too and the fact that models are self-creating a lot. Yeah, I think those two things have changed things really dramatically, and it's lovely.
What about different mental health challenges yourself? I know being a model is sometimes, I mean, you're in positions that most people aren't. You're very vulnerable.
Yeah.
Does that stuff ever affect you, or do you feel, taken down sometimes because of that, or overwhelmed?
It's a very interesting thing that my mental health actually is not good. My kind of baseline mental health is poor.
Okay.
I grew up under very non-ideal conditions. I was in an apocalyptic sect, so they believed the world was about to end. So it's a very unsettling way of life.
Doomsday every day.
It was meant to be, the world was meant to end before I grew up. So it was very clear and present danger kind of thing. It was horrible. And also I experienced some child abuse growing up. Okay. So by the time I was 9 years old, I was beginning to exhibit the symptoms of what I now know is obsessive compulsive disorder, which I think happens to a lot of children who've experienced trauma. They're trying to find a thing that makes them feel safe, and finding compulsion makes you feel in control. Yeah. So I didn't get diagnosed with it for many years until many years later. But it means that my kind of baseline mental health is obsessive compulsive disorder. Right. And I'm very, very lucky that I think as a self-employed person, the type of obsessions and compulsions I have kind of lend themselves to doing quite well, because I'm very diligent, because I can't go to bed until I've finished a job because I'm obsessive. So, I never leave any work undone. I never leave my emails unanswered. Right. And although it's part of a really unhealthy condition, there is a kind of upside to it. So I think I've sort of weaponized the bad mental health that I don't seem to be able to get rid of. I mean, I have therapy, but it is a difficult thing to fight when it's been so much of your life. Ingrained. So at least I've kind of found an outlet for it. And I have to say that I know a lot of models really struggle with body image. And I can totally understand why. But my experience was that I had a terrible body image to begin with, and doing a job where, people tell you you're beautiful every day.
Yes.
I have to say, I find that very nice.
Yes.
And I know I'm not alone in that. I do know some other models who've experienced something similar, that, they had low self-esteem, and their self-esteem is better now, although it is tied to their job. So, I think if I stopped modelling, I might have a self-esteem crash. But in the course of my career, my self-esteem has definitely been raised. And I really appreciate that, because if I think about sort of 15-year-old me or 20-year-old me, the idea of getting naked in front of people in bright light
and letting them capture it.
Horrific. I always used to even turn the lights off to get undressed on my own when I was 20. So that change in me has been really positive. Yeah.
Growing up in we call it a cult. Yeah. What did you kind of just think it was normal for the first decade of your life, or do you remember realizing this was kind of weird, or when that change happened?
I do remember thinking it's kind of, I'm very lucky that there's this tiny little group of people who've got the right religion, and everyone else is about to die in Armageddon, but I did think this is statistically really unlikely that I would be lucky enough to be born into this tiny group of people God likes.
You had that analysis?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. It just seemed, it's not that I didn't believe it, it's just that it seemed like a little bit too good to be true.
Missing something here.
So honestly, when my parents left when I was 13, I wasn't altogether surprised that they turned out to be wrong about the religion we were in. It all seemed just a bit unlikely and a bit strange. And although it was really difficult coming out, because, I'd been taught that I was never going to die. The world was going to end and I'm going to live forever. And I was never going to need a job. So realizing all those things actually I was going to do at 14 it's quite an adjustment.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like it was easy, but it was also pretty amazing to go from thinking I wasn't going to have any choices to actually I'm going to have to choose a job.
All of your choices.
A husband. Wow. Yeah. So it was, I'm not sorry to have gone through it. Clearly it caused trauma, but it's also, it's pretty interesting as well. And it makes you really grateful for just normal things like having a house and a mortgage. Like, yay. And
payments,
most people feel that grateful for those things, but I really do. I didn't think I was going to get them.
Right. Yeah. No, hey, That's a cool perspective. Yeah. Do you have any other family that's still involved in that, or did everybody?
Fortunately, no. Like the
Okay.
rest of my family are still religious, but they all joined more normal denominations since I became an atheist, because it seems to me like the only logical response to escaping a cult is to just go, well, how about if I don't believe in God at all anymore? How would that be? And for me, that was lovely, like really nice. Making your own rules for how you live. For me, that's very positive. But the rest of my family obviously found something in it that was more valuable to them. So the rest of them are religious. Like my sister married a priest.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty religious. I'm really lucky that they're quite positive about my job, because I can see how they might not be.
Could be some challenges there. Yeah,
totally.
That's good. Well, some awareness to realize what you come from, and everybody's going to have some fallout from that at some point, right? It
Absolutely.
could be different paths. So, cool.
Totally.
Cool. What are some big dreams that you want to hit yet? 47, you've got a lot of modeling experience. I interviewed somebody recently that's in their 70s that are modeling, so you've got a lot of years to do this yet. What?
Yeah, like I'd like to stay in it and see where it leads, because I can see in the 20 years I've been doing it, the sort of work I get offered has changed somewhat. And I would love to see what, 20 more years in this field, what kind of work might I end up doing? I would like to find out. And I'm aware that, maybe no one will want me in 10 years' time. It's possible. But I want to kind of go on the journey and find out, because I've enjoyed the whole process so far, and there is some stuff I don't get booked for anymore, but there's some stuff that I didn't even know existed that I do get booked for, which is awesome. So I'd like to just take the journey, see what happens. And I'd also really like to be able to do more work as a speaker or as a spokesperson to talk about destigmatization of sex work, nude modeling, adult modeling, because publishing a book about my career has made me realize how alive that stigma still is. Like my book's about to come out in the USA in December, and I'm trying to find a publicist at the moment. Now, publicists get paid. I'm like paying them, and they're saying no to me based on the subject matter of my book. And that just shows the stigma's still alive, and I want to do something about that, because I'm sure you know people the same as I do. I know people who've been turned down for mortgages and who've had their bank accounts shut because they do nude work or pornographic work or even just glamour modeling. And I'd like to do my bit to change that. So that's a big ambition. It's just I'm not sure if I'll be able to achieve it, but I'd like to do a little bit to try. So that's probably the main thing I'd like.
For sure. You've had that stigma. I guess you've experienced it yourself, obviously. And
yeah. I mean, just the fact that if PayPal knew that I used PayPal, they'd shut me down. And that's it's quite hurtful.
Way to go, guys! Yeah.
Yeah, and I think is it Wells Fargo? If I tried to open an account with them, they wouldn't let me either. I believe, based on what other models have told me, and it kind of bothers me. It doesn't seem fair, really, because my job is legal, so I feel like I shouldn't be denied access to banking, really.
Right.
And I would like my model peers not to experience that kind of discrimination. It just seems really grotesque. Yeah.
And for the amount of illegal things that keep continuing to go on in the world, it's probably
yeah, and it bothers me that the people cancelling our bank accounts are probably buying our products, because I mean, our products are really popular. So it feels so hypocritical. So I'd like to talk about that. I'd like to talk about that every day. That's what I'd like to do.
Sure. Well, that's good. Appreciate your outlook, that your perspective is not just about how do I gain all this for Ariel. You're thinking about the next generation too, right? People that are coming up and their journeys as well, so that they can continue doing what you love to do too, right? So
yeah, I don't have kids, so I think sometimes I sort of see the next generation of models kind of like my children. And so, I feel very invested in making sure that I do my bit to make sure that the profession they inherit from my generation is a nice one. That's what I'd like, because it's so rewarding, but there are some unavoidable areas of risk, and I'd like to do my bit to mitigate those, especially when it comes to kind of sexual harassment and assault, because I said earlier, if you're going to experience that, it's so likely to be at the beginning of your career, where photographers predatory photographers will specifically book you because you're new and you're potentially clueless. And I'd very much like to do my part in making it as inhospitable environment as possible for those predators, because obviously most photographers aren't, but you can see why photographing models is something that might appeal to someone who was
That's right.
a bit predatory in nature.
Yeah. And they, like you say, if you don't know what you're going into, you don't, the naivety, right, is something that catches you off guard. Sometimes you're in the middle of something, you're like, holy crap, I don't want to be here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I made a video, a collaboration with other models a few years ago, where we all just talked about a bad experience. I think it was 8 of us. We all talked about a bad experience and what we would do to stop that happening to us again. And it was really illuminating, but it was pretty horrible to hear so many of these really impressive women who I know who do great work, but so many of them had just had abysmal experiences with photographers, quite often really early in their careers. And yeah, it made me kind of frustrated with the tolerance in the industry up to that point of people like that.
Yeah, people feeling shame for a reason that wasn't even their fault, right? So that's unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, you're definitely on the right track in sharing and changing some of that mentality and that stigma around those kind of things. That's important. So
yeah, and I'm glad that because of the internet, which obviously didn't exist in the modeling world only a few years before I started, at least models can communicate with each other in a way that probably unimaginable to a model who was working in the 90s. And that's so powerful. All our little secret WhatsApp groups and Telegram groups where we can tell each other, don't work with him. It's like, it's amazing.
That guy is a creep. Yeah. No, that's a huge win. And anybody that's listening, I guess that's kind of a good tip too, to make sure you're in those groups and those communities, right? To make sure if you're out there, be safe, right? So
yeah, absolutely. And I kind of like to think there are kind of predatory photographers groups somewhere where they're all going, oh no, don't book her, she's really assertive. That's my hope.
I'd like to think that, but I don't think they're that organized the way they operate in other ways. So
I just like the idea of them telling each other horror stories and then all just deciding to give up because these women are too scary.
Touch them anyway, Cool.
Yeah.
And we're going to be following you a lot just to see where some of those stories go and to hear you speak more and stuff, Ariel. But if people wanted to follow you or get a hold of you and maybe book you, what are some ways of doing that?
Okay, so my YouTube channel is Ariel's Twilight Years, and that is all safe for work, non-nude, all of that, and it's kind of educational content.
Sure.
My Twitter/X is adult, so don't look at it if you're offended by nudity. Sure. I'm at Ariel Anderssen. Anderssen is spelt SSEN at the end. My author website is arielanderssenauthor.com. And then my other website for my modeling work is askarielstudio.com. Yes, that's what it is. Yes. Yes, that's right. That's where I am. And you can also email me directly, especially if you're a model. I promise always to answer emails from other models. So I'm kinkyarielanderssen@gmail.com, but I also link to that from my YouTube channel, so you can find me there.
Find you with cool. Well, thank you, and appreciate the willingness to give back to the industry. That's a big thing. So
no, I'm still so grateful for the models who helped me when I was new. I'm so glad that there was someone for me to ask this stuff, and so definitely wanting to pass that on. It just feels like the most important thing you can do as an old model, to do that for the young ones.
Fair enough. It's good. Cool. Any final thoughts you wanted to capture or make sure that everybody knows about Ariel before we sign off?
I feel like I've talked a lot. Thank you for letting me talk so much.
No, thank you.
No, I think I have covered everything that I am and everything that I do. Oh, my memoir is called Playing to Lose, and you can find it. Yeah, it's on Amazon. Perfect. So yeah,
we're going to all look into that. So right on. Well, thank you for joining. And
thank you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to connecting down the road and seeing more of your work and just hearing the impact that you're making for those up and coming models too. So
thank you very much. And thank you so much for having me. It's really been a great pleasure to talk.